45-year-old bride left alone at the depot. Then a sheriff said, "I'll take her home." The train was already a mile down the track when I noticed her. I wasn't looking for anything to notice. I'd come to the depot to sign for a shipment of wire, 4 spools, back-ordered since February, and the station master was slow with paperwork the way he was slow with everything. So I was standing on the platform with nothing to do but watch the engine disappear around the bluff and let the smoke thin out in the morning air. That's when I saw her. She was sitting on a trunk. Not a carpet bag, not a valise, a trunk, the kind you pack when you're not planning to come back. Black leather, brass fittings, and a crack along one corner that had been repaired with a strip of rawhide. She was wearing her good dress. You could tell it was her good dress the way you can always tell, pressed too careful. Color a little faded from the last time it got pressed too careful. A small spray of cloth flowers at the collar that she'd pinned on this morning and probably touched once or twice, since then without knowing she was doing it. She wasn't crying. That was the first thing I marked. Her hands were in her lap, folded the way a woman folds her hands when she's decided she isn't going to let her face do anything it shouldn't. I knew what I was looking at before I walked over. In 17 years wearing a badge in Crail County, you learn to read a situation before you get close enough to hear it. Her name was Nora Pell, she told me, when I touched the brim of my hat and asked if she was all right. Pell was her name from before. She'd been Nora Aldridge for about 40 minutes, she said, until her husband of 40 minutes walked back onto that train. She said it plain, no dramatic pause, just told me like she was reading from a document. I asked her if she had family in Crail Junction. She said no, she'd come from Hayes City. The arrangement had been made through a correspondence agency. She'd written letters for 8 months, she said, and they'd been, she paused here, chose her word, cordial letters. He'd sent a photograph. The photograph had not been recent. She said, when he saw me on the platform, he said he'd been under the impression I was younger. She said it without any particular expression, and looked at the middle distance while she said it. I was 51 years old standing there. I'd been a sheriff for going on 2 decades, and before that a cavalry sergeant, and before that a boy from Missouri who thought the world was a reasonable place. I'd stopped thinking the world was a reasonable place somewhere around 1862. But there was something about what she said, the clean flatness of it, the way she wasn't asking me to be sorry for her, that hit me in a way I didn't have a name for right then. I told her my name, said I was the county sheriff, and asked what she intended to do. She looked at the trunk. Then she looked down the empty track where the train had gone. "I don't know yet," she said. I took her to Me Harker's boarding house on Sycamore Street, because Me was a decent woman who didn't ask unnecessary questions, and because the alternative was leaving Nora Pell alone on a platform with a trunk and 40 miles of open prairie between her and Hayes City, and I wasn't built for that kind of leaving things. Me gave her a room on the 2nd floor with a window that faced east. I carried the trunk up the stairs. It weighed more than I expected, books probably, and I noticed she didn't offer to help and didn't apologize for not helping, just held the door at the top of the landing and said thank you when I set it down. I told her I'd check in the next day. She said she'd be there. I did check in, the next day and the day after. I told myself it was reasonable. She was a woman alone in a town where she knew nobody, without money enough to get back to Hayes City and without anyone to wire for the money. I'd wired the correspondence agency on her behalf, which wasn't strictly official business, but they needed to know what their man Aldridge had done. Somebody needed to know. The truth is I started finding reasons to walk past Me Harker's in the afternoon, which was a particular direction I didn't need to go most days. The truth is I was sitting with something I hadn't sat with in a long time, and I was still working out what it was. Her name had been Nora Pell for 40 years and Nora Aldridge for 40 minutes. And by the end of the first week, she was going by Nora Pell again, and something in the way she said it, quietly, settling back into it, told me that was the right call. She found work quickly. That was the first thing that marked her for me, separate from all the rest. Doc Greer's wife needed help with the practice 2 mornings a week, filing records, managing the appointments, keeping the waiting patients from working themselves into a worse condition than the one they came in with. Nora showed up Monday, and by Friday Greer's wife was talking about her like she'd hired on a general. She was a capable woman. You saw it in small things. The way she listened, completely, like she'd put everything else down and would pick it back up later. The way she spoke to people, straight on, without the roundabout that most folks use when they're nervous. The way she carried herself through a town that had watched her get left on a platform and was still watching her now. Some of them kind about it, and some of them not, and she let none of it rearrange her face into anything other than what she intended. I asked her one afternoon. I'd walked over to Greer's on some thin pretense I've since forgotten if the talk bothered her. She thought about it. Some, she said, less than it would have 10 years ago. That was all she said about it. I should tell you about myself, because this story doesn't make sense without it. I'd been a husband once, Eleanor. We did 8 years and they were good years, and then she got sick the spring of '74 and was gone before summer. We didn't have children. We'd wanted them, but they didn't come, and after Eleanor died, I stopped thinking about that particular wanting because it didn't help anything to think about it. I ran for sheriff that fall. People said it was too soon, that I should take time. I didn't take time. Time was the problem. I needed something to fill the shape of the days, and a badge does that. It gives every hour a reason to be what it is. 17 years. I got good at the work. I got precise and steady, and I knew this county the way you know a piece of ground you've walked every day in every weather. I knew where the trouble came from, and I knew how to meet it before it came looking. I kept the peace, which is less dramatic than it sounds and harder than it sounds, because keeping the peace means all the small interventions you make before the thing that would have required a gun. But I hadn't had anyone to come home to since Eleanor, and I was 51 years old, and I'd come to think that was just the shape of it now. A man my age, in my line of work, living alone above the jail because it was easier than keeping up a house. You got to a point where you stopped expecting the shape to change. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't pining. I wasn't lying awake making wishes. I'd made my peace with it. But something shifts in a man when he's useful to someone who matters, and I hadn't felt useful to a particular someone in a long time. The trouble with Aldridge came in late October. I'd half expected it. A man who pulls what he pulled doesn't just disappear without someone having to deal with the consequences later. He sent a letter, not to Nora, to me, through the county offices, saying he wanted his trunk back. His trunk. The trunk Nora had packed and carried 140 miles on a train and dragged onto a depot platform and waited beside in her good dress while the train left without her. I read the letter twice. Then I set it on my desk and let it sit there a full day before I decided what to do about it. What I did was write back. I told Aldridge that the trunk contained property Mrs. Pell had brought with her from Hayes City, that he'd forfeited any claim to those contents when he abandoned her at the depot, and that if he wanted to press the matter, he was welcome to come to Crail Junction and press it in front of me and a judge. I said come on, essentially, but civil. I didn't tell Nora right away. I told her that evening at me Harker's on the porch where she sometimes sat in the last light of the day. I showed her the letter and then my reply. She read my reply carefully, read it twice the way I had. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know. He might come. I know that too. She folded both letters and handed them back to me and looked out at the street. There was a wagon passing, and the sound of it filled in the quiet between us. Thank you, Sheriff, she said. She'd been calling me Sheriff. I'd been letting her. I wasn't sure why I'd been letting her. I said you could call me Garrett. She looked at me, just looked. Not searching for anything, not calculating, just looking the way she listened to things, complete. All right, she said, Garrett. Aldridge didn't come. The correspondence agency sent a letter of reprimand and a returned portion of the fee, and that was the end of it. I'd half hoped he'd come, which I recognized wasn't a becoming thing to half hope. November went cold fast that year. The first real snow came early, the kind that catches the grass still green, and everything looked unlikely and clean for a few days until the mud came back. I was helping me Harker board up a window that the wind had worked loose. Me had a way of accumulating small maintenance problems until there was a man on the premises to hand them to. When Nora came through the front door with 2 cups of coffee and watched me for a moment from the doorway. You're good at that, she said. I was fitting a new strip of weather stripping around the sash. Nothing complicated. It's a window, I said. I know what it is. She came and stood near enough to hand me the coffee. I mean you're good at just getting at a thing, not making a show of it. Just doing it. I didn't know what to say to that, so I took the coffee and drank some and looked at the window like I was still thinking about the window. But I carried it home with me. I am good at getting at things and not making a show of it. Nobody had said so out loud to me in a long time. It's a small thing to say and a large thing to hear. I asked her to supper in December. I want to be clear about how I asked her. I wasn't smooth about it, and I didn't try to be. I stopped her outside Greer's after her Tuesday morning, and I said I'd like to take her to Dolland's for supper if that suited her. I said it looking at her, not at the ground, because I was 51 years old and past the point of looking at the ground. She said yes. We went on a Thursday. Dolland's was the best place in town, which was not saying very much, but the steaks were good, and the dining room was warm, and nobody gave us a hard look that I noticed. I noticed everything in that room because that's the way I'm made, and I noticed nothing that needed attending to. She told me about Hayes City. About her people. Her father had been a surveyor, out in the field most of her childhood, and her mother had kept a tight house and a sharper tongue. And Nora had learned to read early because books were quieter than the house, and she'd preferred quiet. She told me about her work before. She'd kept ledgers for a dry goods operation for 11 years, which was how she'd saved enough to pursue the correspondence arrangement, because she wasn't going to do a thing like that without money of her own. In case it didn't work, she said. You planned for it not working. I planned for any outcome. She looked at the candle between us. I was optimistic or I wouldn't have come, but I was practical enough to prepare. That was Nora Pell in one sentence, if you could fit a person in a sentence. Optimistic enough to come, practical enough to prepare. I told her about a leaner sum, not all of it, but enough. She listened the way she always listened, putting everything down and picking it back up later. When I was done, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said she was sorry. She sounds like someone worth missing, she said. She was. That's a good thing, even when it's hard. I thought about that for the rest of the evening and several evenings after. The winter settled in proper by January. The kind of cold that gets in through the walls no matter what you do to the walls. I took to stopping at me Harker's on the way back from my evening rounds, not every night but most, and Nora and I would sit in the parlor, and me would leave us to it in the tactful way that me managed things when she chose to manage them. We talked about books mostly. She had a reading habit like a standing fire, always going, always needing something fed into it. We argued about Cooper, who I had opinions about that she found amusing, and she told me about a novel by a Russian that I'd never heard of and wouldn't have thought to pick up in any case, but she described it in a way that made me want to. There was a cold snap in February that froze the pump behind me's house, and I came over in the early morning to help with it, which is not a romantic occasion, but I remember it clearly because when we finally got the pump working again, she looked at me with ice crystals on her coat front and said, "I don't know what I'd do without you," and then looked away immediately like she hadn't meant to say it that way. I was wrapping the pipe back up in burlap, and I didn't say anything, just kept working, but something settled in my chest right then. Something I hadn't felt in going on 20 years, being needed by this particular woman. That's what settled. In March, she was going to leave. I found out through me, which wasn't the way I'd have wanted to find out. Her sister in Abilene had written. There was work there, a school-teaching position, and her brother-in-law knew someone on the hiring committee, and it was real employment, stable and reputable, not the borrowed position she'd made for herself at Greer's through willpower and charm. Me told me over the fence while I was repairing a loose board on the alley side. Me had a way of improving her fences whenever she needed to tell me something. I finished the board, then I went around to the front of the house and knocked. Nora answered. She must have seen something in my face because she said, before I said a word, "Me told you." Me told me. She stepped aside and let me in, and we stood in the parlor where we'd sat all winter talking about books. "It's a good position," she said. "I expect it is." I wasn't not going to tell you. She was watching me. "I was going to tell you this week." "I believe you." She had her hands in front of her, not folded the way they'd been at the depot, just held open. "Garrett," she said, "say something else." I'd been thinking for the past 40 minutes since me and the fence about what I should say and how I should say it. I'd been composing things. Reasonable, measured things that a man with some dignity composes when he knows this is a moment that counts. What I said was, "I don't want you to go." Nora Pell looked at me, the whole of her looking at me. "Then say so," she said. Say it all the way. 17 years keeping the peace in Crail County. A cavalry sergeant before that. A man who'd stood between things that needed standing between more times than he'd bothered to count. I said it all the way. I told her I'd thought I was done with this. I told her I'd made my peace with living alone, and that I'd believed that peace was real until she showed up on a platform last September with a trunk and her good dress and her hands folded in her lap. I told her she was the most capable woman I'd ever met, and that wasn't a compliment so much as a plain fact. The way saying a rifle is accurate is a plain fact. I told her I wasn't a young man and I wasn't a rich one, and the house above the jail was no kind of house for anyone with standards. But I was good at getting at things and not making a show of it. And if she needed a man to stand between her and the world and make sure the pump didn't freeze, and the windows were weathertight, and nobody wrote her letters that shouldn't be written, I was built for exactly that. And I'd do it for the rest of whatever I had left if she'd let me. My heart was going harder than it had in some years. I could feel it. She was quiet for a long moment. "Garrett," she said. "Yeah. The house above the jail has a good east window." I didn't follow her right away. "For morning light," she said. "I like morning light." Something moved in my chest that I didn't have a word for and probably still don't. We married in April. Quietly, the judge's chambers, me Harker as witness, a Saturday morning when the light was the way she'd said she liked it. She wore the good dress again, the one from the depot. I noticed she'd replaced the cloth flowers at the collar with real ones, small yellow ones from wherever she'd found them this early in the season. I had the ring in my coat pocket, and when I put it on her hand, it fit the way things fit when the right person has the right thing, and that's the only way I know to say it. That was 7 years ago. I'm still sheriff. My knee gives me trouble in cold weather, and I've taken on a deputy, boy named Cruz, who's got good instincts and bad handwriting, and who Nora has taken it upon herself to teach to write a proper report. She helps at Greer's still, one morning a week, and she reads in the evenings, and the house above the jail has been fixed up better than it deserved. Some mornings I'm up before her, making coffee, and I hear her footsteps overhead. The particular sound her footsteps make on the boards I know by sound now, and I think about that platform. About the train already a mile down the track. About a woman sitting on a trunk in her good dress with her hands folded. I think about what a thing it is to be needed by someone worth being needed by. To have a woman like that choose to stay. Not out of desperation, not because she had nowhere else to go. She had Abilene, she had the teaching position. She had a sister and a brother-in-law and a future that didn't require me in it. She chose me anyway, with her eyes open and her money in her own name and her hands unfolded. That's the thing I carry. Not the badge, not the years, not even a leaner, God rest her. This, what it feels like to be chosen by a woman who didn't have to choose you. By a woman who looked at a man pushing 52, living above a county jail with a bad knee and a quiet way and no children to show for his years, and said all the way out loud, yes. Some mornings the coffee's done before she's down, and I stand at that east window, and the light comes in the way she said she liked it, and the sound of her on the stairs is the best sound I know. That's all, that's the whole of it. I was a man nobody was looking for, and she found me anyway.